I clean the buildings nobody uses anymore. Closed schools mostly. This one shut down in '97, and the company keeps it heated just enough that the pipes don't burst. So I walk it 4 nights a week and log that nothing's changed. The hallways down here are the kind you never think about. Cinder block painted a color that used to be cream. There's a smudge line running along the wall about waist high on me, which is head high on a kid, where 30 years of little hands dragged along the paint on the way to class. It's the one human thing left in the place. First few nights I found it comforting. Then one morning I stopped, because the smudges near the end of the hall were fresh, small, and still a little damp. Let me back up, because if I just start there, it sounds like something it isn't. There are 2 of us who cover the closed properties for the company, and we never work the same building on the same night. Most shifts, nothing happens. You get used to nothing happening. That's the whole job. You walk in around 10, you do a loop of the halls, you check the boiler, you make sure no kids got in through a broken window and no water's coming through the roof, and you sign the log by the office and go home. 4 nights a week. The pay's fine. The quiet is better than fine. I'd been on this particular building about 3 weeks when I noticed the handprints, and even then I didn't notice them the way you'd think. I noticed them the way you notice a scratch on your own car. Slowly, like they'd always been there, and my eyes only just landed on them. The main hallway on the first floor runs the length of the building. Classrooms on both sides, doors shut, most of them locked. The walls are cinder block, painted that old cream color that schools loved back then. And running along both walls, at about the height of my hip, there's a band where the paint's gone gray and smooth. Thousands of small hands, over the years, trailing along the wall on the way to lunch or the buses. You see it in every old school. Kids can't keep their hands off a wall. I liked it, is the thing. I want to be honest about that because of how the rest of this went. A building that empty starts to feel like it was never used at all, like a set. The handprint line was proof that it had been real once, that kids had actually run down that hall. It made the place feel less like a tomb. So on my loop, I'd walk that hall, flashlight low, and the light would catch the smudge band, and I'd think, okay, this was a real place. And then I'd check the boiler and go home. The first thing that was wrong, I explained away in about 10 seconds, and I'd do it again. Old buildings hold damp. That's just true. Cinder block sweats when the temperature swings, and the heat in that building cycled on and off all night on some ancient timer nobody had touched in decades. So when I found a patch of the wall near the end of the hall that looked darker than the rest, a little wet looking under the flashlight, I didn't even slow down. Condensation. Old places do that. The pipes settle, the walls sweat, the cold gets in. I mopped my loop, logged it, went home. It was the next night that I actually stopped. Same hall, same time, maybe midnight, and the wet patch was still there, except it wasn't a patch anymore. It had shape. Down near the end of the hall, right in the gray smudge band, there were handprints that stood out darker than the rest. Not the flat, worn-in smear of 30 years. Individual prints, fingers spread, small, and when I put my own light right up on them, they were damp. I touched one. I want you to know I touched it, because later I'd wish I hadn't. My fingertip came away with a little moisture on it. Cool, not slick, just barely wet, the way a glass feels after the ice inside it melts. Condensation, I told myself again. The wall sweats, and where the old oil from 1,000 little hands soaked into the paint, the moisture beads up different. That's a real thing. That's chemistry. I said it out loud in the empty hall, and it sounded reasonable, so I let myself believe it. But the prints were small, and they were spread out along maybe 6 feet of wall, and when I really looked, they went in a direction, left to right, toward the far stairwell, like something the height of a first grader had walked that stretch of hall, with one hand dragging along the cinder block the way the real kids used to, 30 years ago. I told myself it was the old wear pattern catching the damp. I told myself I was tired. I finished the loop. I did not go down to the far stairwell. The company's log is a clipboard by the front office, And every night you write the date, your initials, and anything you found. Broken window, water intrusion, animals, anything. Mostly you write, no issues, and go home. I flipped back through it that second night, standing under the one working light in the office, and every page for months said the same thing. No issues. No issues. My initials, the other guy's initials, no issues. So I wrote no issues too, because what was I going to write? Damp handprints? They'd think I was drinking on shift. Old buildings do this. That was the explanation I settled into, and for about a week it held. Cinderblock sweats, oil beads. The wear pattern was always there, and the damp just made it visible. Anyone would have thought the same thing. I wasn't being paranoid. Not yet. The prints were gone the next night. Drywall, gray smudge band, nothing. That helped. That helped a lot, actually, because a thing that comes and goes is easy to file under weather. I stopped shining my light on that stretch. I did my loop. I checked the boiler. I logged no issues. I went home and slept fine. I want to be clear that I slept fine. For a while. It stopped being about the wall the night I heard the water fountain. There's a fountain bolted to the wall about 2/3 of the way down the main hall. The low kind, built for little kids. The bowl no higher than my knees. Long since shut off, obviously. Water to the building's been cut for years except the boiler line. That fountain hadn't run since before the millennium. I was at the far end of the hall, near the stairwell, doing the part of the loop I'd started rushing through. And behind me, back toward the office, I heard it. That specific sound. The gargle and hiss of a school water fountain running. The button held down. Water arcing up and splattering back into the metal bowl. I know that sound. Everybody knows that sound. You lined up for it 1,000 times as a kid. For the first time, I heard it, clear as anything, somewhere back down the dark hall. I turned around and swept the flashlight down the corridor, and of course, there was nothing. The beam went all the way to the office door and caught nothing but empty floor and shut classroom doors. And the sound stopped. Not faded, stopped. The exact instant my light hit the fountain. The way it stops when a kid takes their thumb off the button. Pipes. That was the word I reached for, walking back up the hall with my heart going. Old pipes settling, air moving in a still line, the boiler kicking the temperature, and something knocking loose in the wall. Buildings this old make noises all night. You get used to it. I'd only been getting used to this one for 3 weeks. I made myself walk right up to the fountain and put my hand on the bowl. The metal was wet. There was a thin film of water in the basin, beaded around the drain, like somebody had just taken a drink. I stood there with my hand flat on the cold metal, and I did the math I did not want to do. There's no water to that fountain. I checked the shutoff myself my first week, and the bowl was wet. I told myself the roof was leaking. I told myself condensation was pooling in the low spots. I told myself 6 things standing at that fountain, and not one of them explained why the water was only in the bowl and nowhere on the floor around it. I logged no issues. I was not going to be the custodian who reported a ghost drinking from a fountain, but I sat in my truck in the lot for a while before I drove home, and I kept coming back to the wet bowl, and I couldn't make it flat in my head. It kept standing up. I did tell someone. I want that on the record, because of how it went. The company sends a regional guy around every so often, a man named Doug who's been with them longer than anyone and has clearly seen every excuse a night custodian can invent. He came by one afternoon to check the boiler certification, and I met him there because I wanted a daytime look at the building anyway. Everything's better in daylight. The handprint band was just a worn wall. The fountain was just a broken fountain. I told him about the noises. I kept it vague. Pipes, I said. Water sounds. I wanted to make sure there wasn't a leak somewhere I was missing. Doug walked the hall with me, ran a light along the ceiling, checked a couple of the low spots on the floor for staining. He knocked on the wall by the fountain, listened. shrugged. He found nothing, and he explained it away in about 30 seconds. Old plumbing traps hold water, he said. Building this age, the whole system's full of air, and it moves when the heat cycles. And it'll gurgle like something's running. Happens in every one of these old schools. He'd heard it himself 100 times. It was easier to believe him. That's the honest truth. A man who'd worked these buildings for 30 years stood in that hall and told me it was normal, and I wanted so badly for it to be normal that I took it. He signed the boiler cert. He told me to call if I saw actual water on the floor, and he left. And walking back to my truck, I felt lighter than I'd felt in a week. I even laughed at myself a little. Ghost fountain. Get a grip. That was the last easy night I had in that building, because after Doug, it got closer. The night after he left, I found the first one that faced me. I'd stopped shining my light on the smudge band on purpose, which tells you I already knew. Some part of me already knew, whatever Doug said. But I had to do the loop, and the loop runs the length of that hall, and about halfway down, my beam swung across the wall the way it always did, and caught something my eye snagged on before my brain did. The handprints in the band weren't sideways anymore. Every other night, when they showed up at all, the prints had gone left to right, the way a hand drags when somebody's walking past, fingers pointing the direction of travel. This time, in one spot, right at the middle of the hall, there was a single set of 2 prints, side by side, fingers pointing up, both hands flat on the wall, the way you press your hands to a window when you want to see out, or the way somebody small stands facing a wall with their palms against it because a grown-up told them to wait there. They were damp, fresh, and they were pointed at the classroom door directly across the hall. I stood there and I built the explanation, the way you build a wall you already know won't hold. A pipe behind that section sweats worse than the rest. The damp beads on the old handprint oil, and 2 of them happen to line up. That's pattern matching. Human brains see faces in clouds and hands on walls. Anyone would have thought the same thing. I wasn't being paranoid. Not yet. But I've pressed my own hands against a lot of walls in my life, and I have never once left a print with the fingers that evenly spread, that deliberate, at that exact height, unless I meant to. These weren't the smear of a kid trailing past. Somebody had stood at that wall and pressed both hands flat and held them there, on purpose. That was the detail I couldn't explain. Not the damp, not the direction, the purpose. And once I'd seen the purpose in it, I couldn't unsee it in any of the rest. I looked at the classroom door they were aimed at, room 14, shut like all of them. And under the door, in the gap between the door and the floor, there was a faint line of light. Not my flashlight, a low, steady glow, the color of a hallway nightlight, coming from inside a room that had no power and no window to the outside. I did not open that door. I want to be honest that I thought about it for a long time, standing in that hall, and the only reason I didn't is that the 2 handprints were facing it, and it kept coming back to me that whatever had pressed its palms to that wall was waiting to be led into that room, and that if I opened the door, I'd be doing something for it that it couldn't do for itself. The light went out while I was standing there, not like a switch, like something on the other side of the door had moved away from it. I logged no issues. I keep telling you that, and I keep hating it, but I want you to understand how easy it was, every single time, to write those 2 words and go home. That's the part nobody tells you about a thing like this. It doesn't come at you all at once. It comes one deniable inch at a time, and every inch has a reasonable explanation sitting right next to it, and all you have to do is pick up the explanation instead of the truth. I picked it up every time, right until I couldn't. 2 nights later, I was doing the loop, and I'd relaxed enough to be walking it properly again, taking my time, when I smelled it. It came before anything else. Not damp, not the shut-up building smell of dust and cold cinder block I'd gotten used to. Something warmer. Milk and crayons, and that specific Swedish smell of a classroom full of small kids. The smell of a place where children spend all day. I hadn't smelled it once in 3 weeks. There were no children. There'd been no children since '97. I stood in the middle of the hall and breathed it in, and my stomach turned over, because I knew that smell from being a kid myself, and it did not belong in an empty building at 1 a.m. Old buildings hold smells, I told myself. 30 years soaked into the walls, and the heat cycles it out. That's a real thing. It's a real thing, but it doesn't come on all at once, in a wave, in the middle of a hallway that smelled like nothing the night before. And then, under the quiet, down the hall past the classrooms, I heard the handprints. That's the only way I can describe it. A soft, dragging, padding sound, low on the wall, moving. The sound a small hand makes trailing along cinder block as somebody walks. Coming from the dark end of the hall, coming closer. I put my flashlight on it, and the beam shook. There was nothing there. Empty hall, shut doors. But the sound didn't stop this time. It kept coming. That soft drag and pat, getting nearer. And the smell got thicker, and I did the thing you're not supposed to do. The thing I'd have told anyone else not to do. I backed up. I backed all the way up the hall to the office, watching the empty corridor, and the sound followed me at a walking pace, low on the wall, right at the height of that gray smudge band, and it stopped at the edge of the light spilling out of the office door. It stopped right where the dark started, like it wouldn't come into the light, and for the first time, standing there with my back against the office door frame, I had the feeling it knew exactly where I was. I did not finish the loop. I signed the log with a shaking hand. No issues, God help me. And I left 2 hours early. I sat in my truck in the empty lot, and I watched the dark windows of that school until the sky started going gray, and not one light came on, and not one thing moved. And it did not make me feel any better at all. I almost quit. I want you to know I got as far as typing the message to the company. And then I did this stupid thing. The thing I've done my whole life. The thing that's gotten me in trouble before. I got curious. Because a thing that comes and goes and drinks from fountains and walks the wall at kid height, a thing that stops at the edge of the light, that's not random. It has a pattern. And I wanted to know what the pattern was before I ran from it. So the next night I went back, and instead of avoiding the far stairwell, I went down it. The stairwell drops to the lower level, which is half underground. The old cafeteria and the boiler room and a couple of storage rooms nobody's opened in decades. That's where the smudge band led, all those nights, if you followed the damp prints. Down and to the right, toward the cafeteria. The smell was stronger down there. Milk and crayons, thick as a held breath. And the handprint band ran along the stairwell wall, down and down. And here it wasn't worn in and gray. Here it was fresh. Small, damp prints, one after another, going down the stairs ahead of me, like something had come up this way and gone back down 100 times. I counted the prints. I don't know why. It's the kind of thing your brain does when it's trying not to do anything else. And that's when I noticed the part that didn't fit. The prints weren't all one size. There were little ones, first grader ones, the size that matched the band upstairs. But mixed in with them, going down the same stairs, there were bigger ones, older kid hands, and a few that weren't small at all. I stood on the stairs with my light on those prints, and I understood something I did not want to understand. It wasn't one child, and they hadn't all been children for a while. Halfway down, the temperature changed. Not colder, warmer. The stairwell going down into a half-buried level should get colder the deeper you go. Everybody knows that. The ground holds the cold. This got warmer, step by step, a close, held warmth, like a room full of bodies, and the milk and crayon smell thickened with it until I was breathing through my mouth. I told myself the boiler room was down here, and the heat off it pooled at the bottom of the stairs. That's a real thing. Heat rises. It collects. It made sense when I said it out loud, so I said it out loud, and my voice sounded small in that stairwell, and nothing answered it, and somehow that was worse than if something had. There was a sound coming up the stairs to meet me, too, under the warmth and the smell. A low, wet, rhythmic sound I couldn't place at first, dozens of it, overlapping. It took me until the bottom of the stairs to understand what it was, and when I understood it, my legs nearly stopped working. It was the sound of small mouths, swallowing, a whole room of them, drinking. At the bottom of the stairs, the cafeteria doors stood open. I'd never once left them open. The company keeps them shut. I know they were shut because I'd shut them myself on my first week and never had a reason to touch them since. And on the wall beside the open doors, at the height of the smudge band, there was a light switch, and around it, packed close, were dozens of small, damp handprints, layered over each other, worn into the paint, reaching up toward a switch that no longer turned anything on. 30 years of small hands, reaching for a light that would never come back. And past the doors, in the dark of that room where a whole school used to eat lunch, I could hear them. I want to be careful here, because I never saw anything clearly, and the second I tell you I saw a thing, you'll picture a thing, and that's not how it was. I didn't see a thing. I saw the room. The cafeteria was long and low, the way they were built back then, with those folding tables pushed against the far wall where the company had stacked them years ago. My flashlight only reached so far, and in the dark past where the light reached, the room was full of sound. Small sounds. The scrape of shoes on a tile floor, a tray set down, that murmur a room of kids makes, dozens of little voices all going at once. Not words, just the sound of it, the exact texture of a school lunchroom, and under it, the drag and pat of hands on the walls, all around the edges of the room, moving in the dark, just past my light. The smell was overwhelming. Milk, crayons, and under that, now, close up, something else. Something older and thicker that the sweet smell had been hiding the whole time. The smell of a place that had been shut up with something in it for 30 years. My light swept the room and caught the edges of things at the boundary of the dark. Low shapes, moving, never all the way in the beam. They pulled back from the light the way the sound in the hall had pulled back, sliding just past the edge of it, so that everywhere I pointed the flashlight was empty, and everywhere I didn't point it was full. And then, right at the edge of the beam, close, one of them let me see part of it, just for a second, just the hand. It was small, a child's hand, the fingers spread, reaching along the wall the way they all did. But the skin was wrong, gone the gray of the wall it had been dragging along for 30 years. And the fingers were too long for the size of the hand, worn thin at the tips, like chalk. It reached into the light and touched the wall, and left a damp print, small and perfect, exactly like the ones upstairs. And then a voice, right down at my knee level, close enough that I felt the air of it, said the only words anything said to me in that whole building. It said, "Are you our teacher?" I ran. I'm not going to dress it up. I went up those stairs 3 at a time, with the sounds coming up behind me. That whole murmuring room pouring up the stairwell after me, hands slapping the walls on both sides now. And I hit the top and went down the main hall and out the front doors, and I did not stop until I was in my truck with the doors locked and the engine running. The last thing I saw, looking back at the building, was the main hallway through the glass front doors, and along the wall, in the dark, the gray smudge band. Except it wasn't still anymore. All the way down the hall, at kid height, the whole band was moving, dozens of hands, dragging along the wall in the dark, back and forth, along the one human thing left in that place. I called Doug from the lot, 6 in the morning, and I told him I quit, and he was quiet for a second, and then he asked me one question. He asked if I'd gone downstairs. I said yes. He was quiet again, and then he told me the thing I've been carrying ever since, the thing that I keep trying to make flat and it keeps standing up. He said the building didn't close in 97 because of budgets. He said there was a fire in the winter of 96, in the lower level, in the cafeteria, during lunch. He said they'd told the families it was fast, that it was quick, that it was the smoke and not the flames. He said the building sat empty for a year while they decided what to do, and then they just quietly closed it and paid a company to keep the pipes from bursting and never let anyone tear it down because the families wouldn't allow it. He said the handprint band on the wall isn't where. He said the fire didn't reach the main hall. The kids who could ran for the stairs. They dragged their hands along the wall in the dark and the smoke, feeling their way toward the doors, and most of them didn't make it up. That's the smudge band. That's what it is. 30 years of grief poured into a paint job nobody will ever wash off, at exactly the height of a first grader's reaching hand. I've thought about it every night since. And the reasonable version, the version I tell people, is that I breathed in 30 years of mold in a sealed underground room and I hallucinated the whole thing. The smell and the sound and the hand. That carbon monoxide from an old boiler does exactly that. Makes you smell things and hear voices and see shapes at the edge of your light. That's a real thing. That's chemistry. Doug even said it, unprompted, like he was handing me a way out. Bad air down there. Get it checked. Don't go back. Maybe it was bad air. That's what I tell people. It's not what I believe. Because I keep coming back to the one thing the bad air version can't hold. The voice at my knee didn't ask me to help it. It didn't ask me to leave. It didn't sound afraid. It sounded hopeful. It had been waiting a long time, in the dark, at the bottom of the stairs, with the others. It asked if I was their teacher. And I keep thinking about what happens the next time somebody comes to walk that building 4 nights a week and check the boiler and log that nothing's changed. Somebody who doesn't know about the fire. Somebody who finds the handprints comforting, the way I did. Somebody who follows them down. The company's still paying to keep the heat on. The pipes still can't be allowed to burst. And down at the bottom of the stairs, in the dark past where any flashlight reaches, a whole class is still waiting for someone to come stand at the front of the room. They've been so patient. They just want somebody to stay.